'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the wastes not a creature was stirring, for they had all been turned into paste. The stockings were sitting by the rubble with care, in hopes that Santa would soon be there. The vault dwellers were nestled all snug in their shelter, screams heard outside, the door they would belt her. With Mama in her sleepwear, and I in my cap, we had just settled down for a nuclear winter's nap. Christmas is a time of celebration. It's a time where family and loved ones can gather, exchange gifts, and be merry. Following the nuclear apocalypse that was the Great War, survivors didn't have many opportunities to settle down and host an evening celebrating the holidays. They were, after all, trying to survive. In Appalachia, the remnants of the first responders, with help from the capital's emergency government, tried to get the region back up and running. This would take quite a bit of hard work and would occupy the to-do lists of both factions. It wouldn't be until 5 years after the Great War in 2082 that the surviving factions in Charleston, the responders and the Charleston emergency government, would get a chance to host a Christmas event. Morale was low at the time, and the planned Christmas celebrations aimed to fix that. Little did they know, however, a diabolical attack on the city would interrupt these planned celebrations and change the course of Appalachia forever. This is the story of the Charleston Christmas flood. The first raiders. But in order to provide enough context for why the events of the Christmas flood happened, we need to go back before the Great War. David Thorpe was a ruthless and wealthy business executive working for the pharmaceutical company Arctos Pharma. During no board meeting in particular, David refused to sign a contract because environmental laws and fair wages cut into the company's profits. Yeah, he was that kind of guy. One employee in the legal department of Arctos also suspected Thorpe of partaking in criminal activities, though she would never be able to confirm this. At home, David Thorpe was married with kids to a woman named Rita. However, David was also having an affair with a young mistress named Rosalind Jeffries. Rosalind would play a pivotal role in this tale. The affair between David and Rose would be kept a secret from Rita and the kids. David would plan trips for him and his mistress under the guise of business meetings in DC. It would be during a ski trip to the Pleasant Valley ski resort that the bombs would drop. The end of the world would leave the many patrons of the ski resort trapped. At first, tourists and staff were quite level-headed, patiently waiting for government aid and instructions. However, over time, as supplies began to dwindle, it became clear that no help would be on its way. And so, in a not-so-Fallout-esque twist, rational solutions were brought forward. I know, crazy, right? The staff would lock up everyone's belongings to keep them safe. Scavenging parties would form to gather supplies, and all goods would be rationed to ensure people had what they needed.
It's been barely a week since the bombs fell, and supplies have become scarce. The former guests at the resort are exploring the feasibility of sending out scavenging groups to hunt down whatever they can find. What's starting to dawn on us is that there will be people outside the resort sending groups of their own. Who knows if they'll be friendly, or simply take what they want. Instead of waiting to find out, we've concluded that our goods should be locked up for safekeeping. It's a smart move, and one that will keep our belongings protected until the government rescue teams arrive. It's good to know that there's still some rationality left amongst all this chaos.
The group elected a married couple, Harland and Margie McClintock, to be the tourists' leaders and coordinate supply runs. It was on one scavenging run in November 2077 that the tourists ran into a group that claimed to be offering help. A group of former first responders working out of the region's capital, Charleston, was claiming to offer supplies, training, and aid to any survivors of the Great War. But, to the tourists' dismay, they were turned away, left with nothing to bring back to the ski resort. This failure to secure supplies for the upcoming winter left the tourists with a bad first impression of the ones who claimed to be helping. and also caused people to question the McClintocks' roles as leaders. Surviving the winter. The first winter in the New World was excruciating for any survivors. Snow and cold conditions lasted from December 2077 to late July 2078. Survivors at the White Spring were noted to have never seen a winter as bad as the winter of 78. The first winter following the Great War was brutal for Appalachians, and with the tourists having been unable to secure enough supplies for the long winter, the group went nearly feral. While we will never actually know what happened in those brutal months of cold, when 2 Charleston scouts, Baker and Fleischer, went to see how things were on the mountains, Baker noted that he wished he hadn't. In a terminal entry, he writes, "It was a massacre. Fleischer and I were finally able to get up into the mountains to see what the status was up there. I wish I hadn't. You thought the winter was bad here? You don't even want to know what they resorted to up there. I thought those who have been driven mad by the radiation were ghoulish. But those rich outsiders, they're the real monsters." It would seem that the long winter had driven many of the tourists mad, forcing them to perform some diabolical deeds in order to survive. This was considered as another failure by the McClintocks. The group's choice in leadership was being more critically questioned. The Thorpe era. After the winter, in an attempt to mend the sour relations between the two factions, the responders dispatched 2 members to deliver supplies to those on the mountains. However, where once upon a time some tourists may have accepted the gift with open arms, some were still bitter about being turned away from responder aid months earlier. And so, David Thorpe, upon seeing the pair of responders carrying supplies and goods, shot both of them dead and looted their corpses. This was the first incident of violence towards outsiders the Pleasant Valley tourists made. For some, like the McClintocks, they were sickened by David's actions. Still in charge, the couple would plot to exile the murderer. A snooping Rose would record the conversation between the McClintocks.
"They're talking crap about you again, David. This time, I'm gonna record them so you can hear it yourself."
I know, Harlan, I know. But what are we gonna do? David's not a very reasonable man.
You saw what he did, Margie. He killed those innocent people who came to help us. He killed them in cold blood. And for what? A few measly supplies? The man defied you at every turn. He does what he wants. The people chose you to lead them, not that blowhard.
Lower your voice, Harlan. You don't need to yell at me.
Sorry, dear. You're right. I just don't know what to do anymore. I don't want to live like this. I'm some sort of...
Like some sort of savages? I know. Don't worry. We'll deal with it. I'll hold a trial with the aim to exile him for his crimes.
And if he chooses not to participate in the trial, then what? You're aware more and more people are starting to side with him, right?
Not everyone is willing to follow a foolish madman. Trust me, Harlan. Reason will win out in the end.
I tell you, I'm inclined to go over there and give him a piece of my mind.
Now, Harlan, dear, don't do anything stupid.
You know me, I'm just upset is all. It might just be pissing into the wind, but I'm still going to go talk with him. I'll be civil. Promise.
Where some did side with the McClintocks, many others were with David. To these folks, David was at least doing something to keep the group alive. Sure, he may have been violent and a bit unhinged, but at least he offered a way forward, a way to survive. It wouldn't be much longer before David Thorpe took command of the tourists. In doing so, they went from wealthy tourists to bloodthirsty raiders, willing to do whatever to get ahead and survive. This change in leadership came with a significant fracture to the group, however. There were some that didn't wish to follow David. The tourist-turned-raiders were split into 5 subgroups. Those that wished to follow David would stay at the Pleasant Valley Ski Resort and be known as the Cutthroats. Those who still believed the McClintocks were competent leaders followed them to the Sunnytop ski lanes and were now known as the Diehards. Those who developed a particular taste for human flesh over the harsh winter followed Morris Stevens to Bolton Greens and would be known as the Gourmands. Those who enjoyed a more primitive lifestyle of hunting and camping went with Walter Griswold and would be known as the Trappers. And lastly, those who preferred to be sneaky-deaky-like went with Freddie Lang to the Blackwater Mine and would be known as the Blackwater Bandits. I should note that although the Raiders had been dissolved into these 5 factions, the Cutthroats would remain as the largest of the 5. David quickly made Rosalind his second in command, and under the pair's leadership, the Cutthroats would quickly become one of the most ruthless factions in all of Appalachia. The Cutthroats. Even though the group derived their name from one of the resort's ski slopes, Cutthroat Crag, David Thorpe's Raiders stayed true to their name. 2 notable incidents demonstrated just how cutthroat the Cutthroats were. The Hunter's Betrayal. Hunter's Ridge in the forest region of Appalachia was home to a small post-war hunting and survivalist group. Unsure of what the New World brought, a few folks banded together and started constructing a primitive home and community. One night, a Hunter's Ridge member named Carson discovered a couple that was removing game from some of the group's traps. Where a few members believed that the couple meant no harm by it, Carson was pissed off. They were taking food off their table. In response, Carson tied the couple up and made them walk a plank into a spike pit that was recently constructed by another member, Ethan. Many members believed that Carson was only doing this to intimidate the couple, but before anyone could react, Carson pushed them to their deaths, impaling them on the spike pit. It wouldn't be long before Carson and Ethan heard a radio broadcast from the top of the world and would leave Hunter's Ridge to join the Cutthroats. Sometime later, Hunter's Ridge was attacked and looted by some masked men. In a written warning left at the camp, one Hunter's Ridge member notes that even through the masks, they could recognize Ethan's distinct cough. It would seem that in exchange for membership to the Cutthroats, Carson and Ethan would have to betray and give up the location of their former community. Pretty messed up, but this was the way that Thorpe's Cutthroats operated. Survival at any cost. The Deadly Meeting. Heck, the group wasn't even averse to fighting other raiders. One day, a small group of diehards and cutthroats met at the Spruce Knob campground to discuss the terms for creating a raider alliance. A holotape recording of the meeting can be found on a table outside of the tent.
Hey. Put the gun down. We're here to talk.
Fine.
You repping the Cutthroats?
Maybe. Who's asking?
Name's Repo. I'm repping the Diehards.
Frank. So, what's this all about?
It's about survival. Our gangs are getting picked off one by one.
Yeah, by other gangs. That's how things work.
The hell with that. We're dying out here. All of Appalachia's trying to kill us, and it's got nothing to do with turf or loot.
You talking about the Gourmands? those idiots ate each other to death.
Not just the Gourmands, but the Blackwater Bandits, the Trappers, hell, all of us.
Yeah. It's a rough world. I get it. So what's your point?
My point is, we need to band together, okay? Watch each other's backs. If we don't, we might just end up disappearing.
What's in it for us?
Staying alive? Do you understand what I'm saying, or are you too stupid?
Don't ever say that to me again.
This is what I'm talking about. Pointing that gun at me again is not going to solve anything.
Yeah, it will. It'll get you to shut the hell up. What the hell? He killed Repo? Shoot him! Shoot him!
The meeting didn't start on the friendliest of terms, as you can tell, but it took on a deadly turn when the diehard rep insulted the cutthroat rep, leading to a firefight. The Cutthroats and Diehards wouldn't end up forming an alliance. David and Rose. As you can tell, David and the Cutthroats were a dominant force in Appalachia. David's charisma and ability to ensure the group's survival is what led to many people wanting to join them. The harsh and deadly deeds that the raiders committed were, at least to them, justified to ensure survival. Part of what made the Cutthroats such a strong alliance was the relationship between their leader David and their second-in-command Rosalind. The pair would reassure each other that what they were doing was right. Rose was David's everything, and David was the same to Rose. David cared so much for Rose that it would be her assumed death that would doom much of Appalachia. The Christmas Eve Raid. It was December 24th, 2082, and Rose had yet to get David a gift for Christmas. She would have to get something last minute, and the capital of West Virginia is where she would attempt to find something nice for her lover. Along with a small force of raiders, Rose would attempt to sneak into the responder and emergency government headquarters. The raiders were intercepted by the responder police force on the city's southeastern limits. There, a quick and deadly firefight would ensue. Although the raiders would win the skirmish, it would leave 7 responders dead, with an additional 24 other responders and civilians injured, some in critical condition. On the other side of things, most of the raiders managed to retreat as the responders were unable to pursue due to their own casualties. 7 raiders lay dead, with Rosalind sustaining serious injuries, but still breathing. She would be captured and taken into custody. Senior responder and combat trainer Melody Larkin would commence an interrogation with the unidentified woman.
Interrogation of one Jane Doe, sole captive raider in custody after a deadly attack here at approximately 10:30 p.m. tonight, December 24th, 2082. Girl, you and yours got some nerve. On Christmas Eve, no less. Now I'll ask again. What is your name? Fuck you! That's F as in Frank, U as in... If that's how we gotta do this, then that's how we do it. Now, cut the crap, or he'll hit you again. Oh, that's rich. You think this is a joke? You killed a whole mess of people out there, and now you're gonna answer for it. Nah. David's gonna come for me, and when he gets here, ooh, he's gonna be mad. He'll kill every last one of you if he has to. So here's how it's gonna be. You're gonna let me walk right out of this cell. You'll send me off with a big bag of Christmas goodies to take home to my David. And maybe we'll forget any of this ever happened. David, huh? So we got David Thorpe's what? Girlfriend here? You know, he's the guy who killed 2 very brave and selfless responders who went up to your resort up there to offer help way back when. Well, gentlemen, I think I know how to finally draw our #1 most wanted outlaw out of hiding. You wouldn't. You won't. He'll kill you. He'll kill you all. You just wait. He's coming for you. Keep her locked up. We'll worry about finding a way to send a message up there tomorrow.
While in custody, Rosalind would write a note to David. This would, unknowingly, be the final correspondence to her lover. She writes, "Snagged a pen in case I needed to stab the guard, but the movies always made it seem easier. That responder pig isn't even checking on me anymore, so what the hell's the point of me being locked up? Merry frickin' Christmas to me, I guess. David, I did this all for you. Sorry I got caught. Didn't mean for it to happen this way. I'll fix this and get out here. In the meantime, don't do anything stupid. I couldn't stand to lose you. Rose." Now, of course this letter would never make it to David. I suppose it was more so for Rose to get her thoughts down on paper. Still, it eerily foreshadows what's to come. The next few events all happen very quickly, within the span of a couple hours. With Rosalind locked up, the responders planned to send a message to David Thorpe. In exchange for releasing Rosalind, the responders demanded that the Cutthroats leave them alone. It was a truce, a peace offering. And so the responders sent young Jeff Nakamura and a few others to relay the message to the raiders on the mountains. However, before the responder message could reach the Pleasant Valley ski resort, news of Rosalind's failed raid would get to David first, and he was pissed. The Christmas Flood. Word of the failed raid reached David that night. One raider who managed to survive the gunfight and retreat told David that the responders took no prisoners. David believed that this meant that Rosalind was killed during the Christmas Eve raid. In a bout of rage and grief that only can come from losing a loved one, David plotted a swift revenge. David dug up some old mini-nukes that he and his cutthroats had managed to steal away from Taggarty's Brotherhood of Steel. Not long after, he and his raiders were rigging the nearby Somersville Dam with the explosives. There was no chance to stop David. It would be shortly after midnight that the explosion would be heard. Charleston would be wiped out by the raging waters of the Somersville Lake. Charleston was no more. The aftermath. In David's anger, he would unintentionally kill the love of his life, Rosalind. To honor his late lover, the second family that he had lost, he would reprogram a Miss Nanny in her image, altering the bot's AI to have Rosalind's cheery and upbeat side. This bot would be named Rose. David also crafted a large shrine to her quite a ways away from his base at the ski resort. This was because he still wanted his raiders to see him as an emotionless leader, prepared to do anything to keep his people alive. He didn't want them to think that he had gone soft on them. In truth, David had been broken by his loss. He would turn to the bottle to try and cope, and would become short-tempered, and even more violent, if that was even possible, that is. Cutthroats fractured. The Christmas flood became a sort of wake-up call for some of the cutthroats. No longer were they just a group of survivors trying to survive at any cost. They were now accessories to the worst attack in the short history of the Appalachian wasteland. One of the worst attacks in history, period, really. This did not sit well with some, and feeling a tremendous amount of guilt, some members left the Cutthroats outright. This group, led by a woman named Carol Sweeney, would try to slice out their own small part of the wasteland, away from the violence of the raiders, and away from the prosecution of the responders. They would settle in an abandoned underground railway passage dubbed Big Bend Tunnel. Here, the group would continue their raider ways, accosting the travelers who attempted to use the tunnels for safe passage. Despite this, they still did their best to break away from the bloodthirsty ways of old. There would be no unprompted killings. By being significantly less cutthroat, they managed to set up a trade alliance with the Brotherhood of Steel. In exchange for turning over weapon parts and tech components, the Steel provided the group with a regular shipment of supplies. And while Carol and her group would continuously believe that they were just a few ex-cutthroats waiting for the world to end, they unknowingly set up a tight-knit community and managed to start a new life. Still, they would never truly manage to escape the sins of their past. This splitting up of the Cutthroats, to David at least, served as a way to weed out some of the weaker-willed members. Those who remained were sure to be the baddest of the bunch. But it wasn't of course only the Cutthroats who were greatly affected by the flood. Government destroyed. Outside of the changes to the Cutthroats, the Christmas flood would wipe out the entire Charleston emergency government. Just like that, a relic from the old world, the idea of government, had died. Although some didn't recognize the emergency government as the proper succession to the pre-war state government, the group did have plans to restore order and civility to the region. The faction was, of course, on peaceful terms with the responders, but they also sent envoys to either connect with or scout out other factions, like the Brotherhood of Steel and Free States. Most of all, the emergency government sought to mend the burned bridges between the responders and raiders. Slowly but surely, the emergency government was doing its best to unite the many factions of post-war Appalachia. The Christmas flood, however, ensured that order and civility between the raiders and other factions of Appalachia would never happen. Responders crippled. The flood killed thousands of responders. The group was significantly crippled. Those who managed to survive would travel north to the Morgantown airport. There they would resettle and claim the location as their new headquarters, a new place to rebuild. Morgantown proved to be quite the boon for the decimated faction. Nearby, the Mama Dolce's food processing plant was able to be brought back online. From here, the group was able to set up supply routes with the Free States and Brotherhood using their new food supply as a means of negotiating trades and alliances. Their relationship with the two factions would prove its worth by the time Eckhart's Scorch was released upon the area. The responders also set up a forward outpost in the town of Flatwoods. Here, the responders would set up a radio broadcast inviting survivors and volunteers to come to the town for supplies. The responders would also offer survival training to those who are interested. Even with the responders being able to survive the tragedy and build from it, they would always remember the Christmas flood. The Order of Mysteries declare war. Following the Christmas flood, a relatively obscure and secretive faction would take notice and be able to truly recognize the threat that the Cutthroats posed. Pre-war, Shannon Rivers was the actress for Hubris Comics' Mistress of Mystery. Post-war, she and her husband Frederick set up a vigilante organization that would take in young girls, teach them self-defense, and turn them into agents of justice. This faction was called the Order of Mysteries. On the night of the Christmas flood, Shannon Rivers wrote in her personal log, "They got the dam. We heard the explosion a little after midnight. There was no warning, nothing to be done. Charleston has been wiped out. It's worse than the bombs. The responders are doing what they can, but this is beyond them, beyond anyone. The raiders have already melted back into the mountains. They're a much bigger threat than anyone had realized." This revelation about the raiders' true power, reach, and ruthlessness would push Shannon and her order to commence a 3-year-long campaign against the raiders. And while I'd like to cover the events of the Raider-Order War in a separate video, I will say that Shannon and her order really were the only ones to ever formally retaliate against the Cutthroats. Every other faction dealt with the raiders locally, only ever engaging in violence with them when it was necessary. No one else had really tried to cut them off at the source or bring the fight to them. Maybe this was because people still viewed them as an unorganized, primitive faction, or maybe people were afraid of invoking David's wrath once more. Either way, David Thorpe's Cutthroat Raiders would continue to be a thorn in the side of many. For nearly a decade, the group would disrupt the many factions in Appalachia, whether it be wiping out an entire order, or stealing from the Brotherhood of Steel, or even kidnapping and ransoming off key responder leaders. The Cutthroats would continue to live up to their name. And through it all, the Christmas flood would remain as the inciting incident and catalyst for David Thorpe's harsh ways. And that is the tale of the Christmas flood. Thank you for listening. That is all from me today. If you liked the video, be sure to share and subscribe. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
We lost almost everything. Our homes, our supplies, and most of our family and friends. The days and weeks that followed were the hardest of my life, but somehow we held together. We kept the idea of the responders alive, even though there were only a handful of us left. That's the story of the Christmas flood. Tell your children, tell everyone you meet. Let's keep the memory alive for as long as we can.